Hi there, welcome to Dr. 2 Academy. This is Java tutorial for beginners, lesson number 17. The topic of this lesson is generics. What are generics? In Java, generics are parameterized types. That is, using types as parameters. With generics, we can declare only one method or class to handle different types of data. So how to use generics? We always need the type parameter section. Here, enclosed by the angle brackets of TSUV. Here, TSUV means different type. That is different class name. So to declare a generic method, we always put the type parameter section in front of the method's return type. To declare a generic class, we put the type parameter section after the class name. This is the type parameter naming convention. T means type, E means element, K means key, N means number, V means value. Now let's take a look at the actual code examples of how to use generics. Let's double click eclipse.exe file. Click on Project Explorer. This is the project for lesson 16. Now let's create a new project for this lesson, lesson 17. File, New, Project. Click on Java Project. Click on Next. Project name, Lesson 17. Click on Next. Click on Finish. Module name, com.dr2academy.java tutorial.lesson 17. Click on Create. Right click on lesson 17, new, class, package name, com.dr2academy.java tutorial.lesson 17, class name, code tester. Click on Finish. Now let's create the main method. Public static void main string brackets args braces. Now let's create a user class. Right click on lesson 17, new, class, user. Click on Finish. Now let's add a member variable, username, private string, username. Now let's add a constructor, public user, assign empty string to user, Let's create another constructor. Public user string name name. Now let's override a method called toString. Public string toString return user concatenate username. The reason we override the method toString is when we use the printLine method to print the user object, it will print out the username plus the user. Next, we are going to create a generic class called box. Right click on lesson 17, select new, click on class, class name box. It's a superclass as an object. Click on finish. We are going to define this class as generic class. Let's put angular brackets after the class name. We define the generic class box to handle generic type T, S, U, V. The capital letter T, S, U, V represent different types. Now let's use the generic type to define member variable. Private T type lowercase t as the member variable name. This T is the parameterized generic type. It could be any class if the class is derived from the Java object class. The lowercase t is the member variable name. Let's define another member variable, private s, lowercase s. So we use the generic type s to declare another member variable, lowercase s, private type u, member variable, lowercase u, private capital V, lowercase v as a member variable name. Now let's define the constructor for this generic class. Public box T lowercase t s lowercase s u lowercase u v lowercase v. The parameter type is T, S, U, V. Notice the T, S, U, V could be any class name. Let's implement the constructor. This dot T is assigned by T. So notice this dot. Why do we need that? Because the parameter we passed in is called T, and the member variable is also called T. So we can't write something like this, right? We have to resolve the ambiguity between these two t. The right hand side t is the parameter, the left hand side t is the member variable. So to specify the left hand side t as the parameter, we can put this dot in front of it. This means the current object. So the t is part of the current object, is the member variable. Similar, this dot s is assigned by parameter s. This dot u is assigned by parameter u. This dot v is assigned by parameter v. Now let's write a method to retrieve the first member. Public t get first member. This method will return the first member variable of type t. Now let's write a method to retrieve the second member. Public second member type is s get second member, return member variable s. Notice the member variable s, the type of s is capital S. Now let's write a method to retrieve the third member. Public third member type is capital U, get third member, return member variable lowercase u, this one. Now let's write a method to retrieve the fourth member. Public v get fourth member, return member variable lowercase v. Now let's create a generic method to print out the generic array. Public static type e void print array type e parameter elements. Braces. The capital E enclosed by the angular brackets indicates E is the generic type this method will take in. And here is the parameter of print array method. E could be any generic type. Elements is the array of type E. Let's use the for loop to iterate through the elements array. For element type E, elements braces system out print line so this method print array will take in the elements array. Its element type is E. Here E represents a generic type. It could be a string or user or integer. The for loop will loop through the array elements and they will print out each element. Let's define another static generic method to swap array elements. Public static element type, generic type, we use capital E, void swap array elements array elements integer I, integer j, braces. Let's define a temporary element variable E temp. So the type of the temp variable is E. Let's get the element of I and put it into the temp. Temp is elements I. Now we are going to assign value of element j to element I. I j. Now we put the value of temp back to element j. Here we have swapped the value of element I and the element j. But there is a possibility if the I and the j is outside the boundary of the array elements. So we need to add some extra code here to make sure it will not crash on us. First, we declare a local variable to store the array length. Int length. Get the length of the array. If I is smaller than 0 or I is bigger than or equal to length, print out the error message, system out print line invalid access to elements. I elements array length is length return. Now let's check the parameter j. If j is smaller than 0 or j is bigger than or equal to length, system out print line invalid access to elements. J plus elements array length is length, return so if the index I or j is smaller than 0 or bigger than or equal to the length, then we just print out the error message and return. We will not execute this part of the code, so it will not crash on us. One thing we need to pay special attention is the array index starts from 0, so this has to be greater than or equal to. Say for example, if we have an array of 10 elements, the length of the array is 10, but the index of the last element is 9, since the first element index is 0. Now let's go to the main method by clicking on the code tester. Here's the main method. Let's declare variable integer I2 double D2 stream S2 user 2. The reason we are using integer instead of int to declare I and I2 variable is because the generic class and the generic method can only handle the class derived from the object class. The generic class and the generic method in Java cannot handle the primitive type such as int, a lowercase double. That's why we have to use the wrapper class for integer, and also the wrapper class double for the lowercase double primitive type. Now let's initialize variable I as integer value of 99. Initialize variable D as double value of double 3.4156. This is the value of pi. Let's initialize string variable as Alex. Initialize the user variable create a new user object, pass in parameter Jeff. So we have 4 different types: integer, double, string, user. Now let's use the generic class box to declare an object, box, angular brackets. The first generic type parameter will be integer. The second generic type parameter will be double. The third generic type parameter will be string. The fourth generic type parameter will be user class, box, new, box, angular brackets. The constructor of box, the parameter will be I, D, S, user. So the first parameter is the integer value I. The second parameter is D. The third is S. And the fourth is U. This is the constructor with parameters. Remember, here's how we define the box constructor with parameters. We take in 4 parameters: T, S, U, V. So the first parameter is of type integer. The second parameter, D, is of type double. The third parameter is of type string. The fourth is of type user. This is the parameter, and the type must be consistent. The first parameter type is integer. So the first parameter I is corresponding to the integer type. I2 is box get first member. D2 is assigned by get second member. S2 is assigned by the box get third member. User 2 is box get fourth member. Now let's double click here to put a breakpoint here. Click on Debug button. Step over, step over, step over. So now we have 4 variables. Let's look at here. Value of I is 99. Value of D is 3.14156. Value of S is Alex. User object, username is Jeff. Now we are going to use the generic class box to create an object box. And this object will handle 4 different types: integer, double, string, and the user. Click on Step Into or press F5. Now we are in the constructor of box. Step over. So we assign T99 to member variable T. You can see the value is 99. And the value of double S is 3.14156. The string is Alex. And the user name Jeff. The user object is assigned to the member variable B. Now let's get the first member. Let's step into it. Return T. T is the integer of 99. We can see the I2 expanded. It's 99. Step into it. Second member, return S. Step over. So the double variable D2 is 3.14156. It's the value of pi. Now let's step into it. So the user object is Jeff. So the variable user2 is assigned the value of the fourth member. It's the user object with the name Jeff. Now let's create a string array. Name list. Alex, Jeff, Harry, Linda, Nicole, Jenny, let's call the generic method to print out the name list array. It's a static, so we use the class name box print array name list. Now we are going to swap array elements. Box swap array elements. The first parameter is array, so it will be name list. Let's swap the first element with the fifth element. Let's print out the array again. Let's put a breakpoint here, double click on this line. Let's click on debug button. Click on resume or press F8. It will stop at the next breakpoint. Step over. Step into. Now we are going to use the for loop to print out the array elements. The first element is Alex. Second is Jeff. Third is Harry. Fourth is Linda. Fifth is Nicole. As we can see, we print out each element of the array elements. Sixth element, Jenny. Finish the for loop. Now we are going to swap the first element and the fifth element of the name list array. You can see the first element is Alex. The fifth element is Nicole. Step over. The length is 6. We have 6 elements inside the array, so the length is 6. Value I is 0, so this condition is false. And this condition is false, so this whole condition is false. It will skip the if statement. J is 4, so this condition is false. Length is 6, so this condition is false. Both conditions are false, so this condition is false. Get the first string element, put it into the temp variable, Alex. Now we are going to put the fifth element into the first element. The fifth element is Nicole. We are going to put that into the first element. Step over. You can see the first element is Nicole, but the fifth element is still Nicole. Step over. Now we put the value in the temp back to the fifth element. As we can see, now the fifth element is Alex. Thus, we just swapped the first element and the fifth element. Step over. Now let's print out the array. Step into. Step over. Print out the first element, Nicole. Step over. Print out the second element, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. Step over. So we use the generic method printArray to print out the string array name list. We also use the generic method swapArrayElements to swap the first and the fifth element of the string array. Since the printArray and the swapArrayElements are generic methods, it can handle an array of different types. Next, we are going to see that the same generic method can be used to handle the user object array. This is the array of string type. Now let's create an array of user type. user array, user list is create a new user object, Alex, new user object, Harry, new user object, Jeff, new user object, Linda, new user object, Jenny, new user object, Nicole, braces. Notice after we finish this line, it adds another braces here, but this is wrong, so we need to delete it and press Ctrl Shift F to reformat it. Now let's call the print array box, print array, user list, swap array elements, box, swap array elements, user list, swap the first element index is 0, and the fifth element, its index is 4. Let's print out the array. Let's print out a blank line here. Print line. Double click line 27 to put a breakpoint here. Double click line 30 to put a breakpoint here. Click Debug button. We have already stepped through all these statements, so we don't want to repeat those steps. We can just click on Resume button. It will stop at the next breakpoint. See? Here we use the generic method print array and generic method swap array elements to handle the string array name list. Now we are going to use the same generic method to handle the user object array. Let's click on Resume. So we stop right here. Here we create a user object list. Click on Resume. Here's the user object list. Step over. Now we are going to print out the user object array. Step into it. Here we are going to use the for loop to iterate through the user array elements. We can just pass the user object into the print line to print out the object. Remember, we overrode the method toString. Here we override the toString method in the user class. So when we use the print line method to print the user object, it will run this statement. Let's put a breakpoint here. Step over. See, we stopped right here. The toString. Step over. Now we get into the string class. Now in the print stream. Step over. Right line. See, we just print out the user object. Step over. We are going to print out the next user object, which is Harry, but we don't want to stop at that many steps. So let's go to the user object. Double click this breakpoint to turn it off. Click the box tab. Click on step over. Now we print out the second user object, Harry, Jeff, Linda, Jenny, Nicole. As we can see, we use the print array generic method to print out the user array. Before I showed you how to use the generic method print array to print out the string array. Now we use the same method, print out the user array. Now we are going to use the generic method swap array elements to swap the first element and the fifth element. 3, 4, 5. Let's step into it. Here I is 0, so this condition is false. This condition is false, the if statement. J is 4, so this condition is false. This condition is false. Both conditions are false. This whole condition is false. Step over. The first element is the user object, Alex. Now we're going to put this user object into the temp variable. Now we are going to put the fifth element into the first element. Here, remember, the first element is Alex. The fifth element is Jenny. Step over. Now let's take a look. Now the first element is Jenny. Right? We put the fifth element into the first element. but the fifth element is still Jenny. So we need to put the value stored in the temp back to the fifth element. Step over. You see that the temp variable stores the first user object, which is Alex, and we put that into the fifth element. So now the fifth element is Alex. Step over. Now we are going to print out the new user list. The first element is Jenny. Step into. Step over. See, we print out the first element is Jenny. Now we just continue to print out this user array. Step over. We can use the generic method to handle the parameter of different types, right? Here we use the generic method to handle the string array, and here we use the same generic method to handle the user object array. So by using the generic method, we only need to write the generic method once. We can use the same generic method to handle different types of data. Let's summarize what we just learned about generics. Well, generics, we treat data type as parameters. So we can just declare a single method or class. Then we get a set of related method or class which can handle different data types. So how to declare a generic method? Notice the triangular brackets. The letters inside the angular brackets represent the data type. We also use the angular brackets with the capital letter inside it to represent the return data type. To declare a generic class, the class name has to be followed by the angular brackets with a capital letter to represent a data type. In our next lesson, we'll learn how to use collections. All the collection classes are generic class. We will see the angular brackets extensively in our usage of collection class. That's all for this lesson. I will see you next time. Bye.